So much. So our final segment is brought to you by Engineered Tax Services, where engineering and accounting come together. Joining us via Skype today is Julio Gonzalez, the founder and CEO of Engineered Tax Services, who comes from an immigrant family and is a very strong Trump supporter. Welcome, Julio.
Hi, Carrie.
So, Julio, the Super Bowl is next weekend. There's been a lawsuit surrounding the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which currently isn't paying any property taxes despite using taxpayer money for its construction. Do you think they should pay property taxes?
You know, that's such a tough one, right? Because we've seen two football teams leave lately because San Diego Chargers went to Los Angeles. St. Louis Rams went to Los Angeles because they felt they could get better deals. Those cities didn't want to, have them pay property taxes. And, so they moved. And I'm sure Atlanta was facing the same thing. So I guess in the end of the day, the city there decided that, giving them the property tax exclusion was still a better return on investment, but, at the cost of the local residents.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying about being torn because I don't like taxes. Taxes are
no one likes
the
taxes.
Government theft. But at the same time, I believe in a level playing field. So do you think that by giving these tax breaks, in some respect, it's kind of a crony capitalism, Julio?
Maybe. I think that, here in Miami, where I live, we voted on it, and we had the risk of losing the Miami Dolphins. And we voted it down, so we didn't give them incentives. We didn't exclude property taxes. And ultimately, the Dolphins decided to stay, and the owner put in all the money himself and agreed to continue to pay the taxes. So we went through that as well. I think a lot of teams face that issues because there is demand to move the teams. But that it really is a tough situation.
We have obviously, you might have heard the news that Amazon will open one of its two new corporate headquarters here. The other will be just outside of Washington, D.C. But to do so in New York City, the city promised them an enormous amount of tax relief and really corporate welfare. And it's been criticized by both people as diverse as Tucker Carlson and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm curious where someone like yourself would come down on a company like Amazon, which will bring thousands of jobs here, and there'll be multiplier effects, and definitely a good thing. But also, at what cost did we purchase Amazon? And we're curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think it's probably a pretty significant cost. I think that Amazon's very profitable and should be contributing to the local communities where they have their homes. So I think the problem with these things, right, is that you have to forecast, okay, how many jobs is this going to create? And you just don't know. I mean, it's like predicting the weather there. So, you know that you're giving up a lot. You just don't know what you're ever really getting back in return.
So a lot of these legal arrangements, so people are looking at what's happening in Atlanta very closely because they say it could be a domino effect for other states and other legal precedent. And one of the arguments is that the stadium is technically owned by a government authority, as I understand it, but then there's the company that leases it, a long-term lease, and so they get exempt because it's owned by the government. Do you think that's kind of a shell game that these private, sports-affiliated companies are basically going a backdoor shell game and not having to pay their fair share?
Total shell game, right? I think you're right. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There's the only way to call it.
Yeah, well, it's weird why the government would be in the stadium ownership business, but
I mean, it's a public. I guess that's considered a public good because there could be a lot of like the article we put up said that $400 million they're estimating will be injected into the Atlanta economy because of the Super Bowl. So to say that it's a public interest, I think that's the rationale behind it.
I'm sure you're right about the rationale, but again, it's like predicting anything and forecasting it. You just don't really know. How do they come up with these numbers? I think it's tough to really quantify, but I guess at the end of the day, they felt it was the good investment, and they rolled the dice and brought in a Super Bowl and feel like it's going to be a good return on investment.
Right. I think at least going back to Amazon, I think the fear always is, well, if you don't offer corporate welfare, some other state is going to offer. So really, it takes advantage of all these different cities that want Amazon there and basically pitch them against each other. So this one's offering to give us $100 billion in taxes relief. Will you see 120 billion? Okay, we have 120 billion from Nashville. Can we get 150 billion from Oklahoma City? And I feel that it's the wrong set of incentives. And this is where I do believe there probably should be some government regulation being like, you're not allowed to offer this kind of corporate welfare across the board, so that companies like Amazon can't do that.
Do you agree with that, Julio?
Well, I think so. I mean, the problem with New York is they start with a high tax rate. So I guess what they're saying is we're going to have to give away a lot of these incentives to be competitive and bring these jobs to our market. Maybe they just need to be more competitive from a state income standpoint to, be able to vie for these, in an equal footing. But
well, New York City is not Oklahoma City. We have high taxes because it's a premium on living here and getting access to all the cultural capital that's here. So I think the high taxes are justified.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not justified. I'm just saying that it creates a higher incentive, for these Amazons to come to the city and say, well, you have all these taxes, so what incentives can you give us? Right. But I guess at the end of the day, New York City is saying, hey, it's worth this trade-off. But maybe there's got to be a way to protect the citizens as well from these type of taxes that may be created because of these incentives.
Level the playing field.
Right.
All right, Julio Gonzalez, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for